So it's trivia time. I thought we'd have a bit of fun to start with and see how many clues you need before you can guess the answers. All right, so the first one is, in what year did I write my first lines of code, and what language did I write them in? I'll just start out, give you a few seconds to mull it over. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you might already know the answer. But if not, we'll start with one clue, and that is the year that I wrote my first lines of code was 1 year before Firefox, which was originally named Phoenix. Phoenix was the name of it when I first started using it, was created. So I think this was like 3 years before Phoenix was released, 2 or 3 years before that. So that's your first clue. If you're not super up on Firefox Phoenix history, I got another one for you though. So at the time that I wrote my first lines of code, I lived at my parents' house, and I accessed the internet via AOL dial-up, American Online. You know, those discs, those compact disc CDs, that we used to have all over. We used them as Frisbees, and I don't know, we experimented with putting them in the microwave. That was always fun. So yeah, that's actually how I got on the internet, and it's actually how I first learned to program, was by researching things via dial-up internet. So that might give you maybe the range. That might help out. And I'm not big on, I don't know a whole lot about like movies and popular culture as much as I sometimes try. I'm really not very good at it. But I looked it up, and the internet told me that this really famous movie known as Legally Blonde came out the same year. And so I don't know. Let's see. How are we doing? What are we thinking? Have we narrowed it down a bit? So I'll tell you another thing. So this code that I was writing, I was writing it in Windows Notepad, and the version of Windows that I was using was called Windows Me, or I think it was short for Millennium or something. It was basically the worst operating system ever. It was like a much worse version of Windows 98. Crashed all the time, had so many issues. But yeah, that's what I started out, was using Windows Notepad. So that might also give you some clues into what language it was. And just a few other clues to finish it off. So in this year, BitTorrent was launched, as well as Mac OS X, and this is when the Xbox initially came out. I, didn't get one of those, but I think I had a friend that got one, and I was just like, why would you get that? Microsoft's terrible, and they're never going to succeed. Of course, Xbox has been a massive success, and I was definitely wrong as a child at that point. Yeah, so the answer is 2001. That was the year that I wrote my first lines of code, and the code that I wrote was HTML. And yes, I do consider that a programming language. But yeah, so I don't know. Did you get it right? How did that go? I'm really not great at trivia, but the funny thing is, I'm like, I wonder if I would have gotten it right. I can't really find out though, since I'm the one that's presenting it and wrote it. But the next trivia question we have is more React specific, and this one was kind of interesting to me. So the question is, how many lines of code is React? And I'm specifically talking about all of React. So if you go to the React project, I have like a source folder, all of the actual source code within the source folder, not just the main packages that you import when you're using React, but all of the supporting code. So how many lines of code do you think it is? I think before I actually looked this up, I actually got the source code and analyzed it and stuff. And before I did this, it was one of those things where I'm like, it's probably a lot, but maybe not, it's not going to be like as much as an operating system or something, right? But in my head, I'm like, this is a really big, mature project. It's got to be like tons and tons of lines of code. And everything that you look at online when it comes, or not everything, but a lot of things you look up online, it's like, oh, React is big and adds a lot of overhead and all this. And so you're thinking, oh, it's got to be a lot of lines of code, right? So I was kind of surprised and kind of not surprised about the results. I'll start, I don't know if you have any ideas yet, but, start thinking it through. The first clue is that the number of lines of code is less than half the lines of code in VS Code. Probably doesn't help you too much unless you know how many lines of code is in VS Code, but maybe it helps scale things. The next thing should help more, and that is the React package itself. So like importing React into your project, that package is 13,000 lines of code. And there's, of course, a bunch more packages for React, like React DOM and lots of other things. But just that package alone is 13,000 lines of code. The next clue is that the number of lines of code is 1/10 the number of lines of code of the backend for a Java-based web application I worked on in 2010 at a startup. So I remember way back then we were like, oh, how many lines of code is the backend? And it was a lot. It's a lot more than I thought. And the funny thing is, that was 10 times the amount of code as the entire React project. So that was surprising to me. All right, that probably doesn't help you too much. But this next one, I don't know, maybe it helps, but it was also kind of surprising to me. The lines of code in React is slightly less than the number of lines of code that powers the software for the space shuttle. So I don't know, that's kind of wild to think about, that the number of lines of code in React is even like you'd think software powering a spaceship essentially would just be way more. But it also might just show how much things have changed since we started writing code back when the code was written for the space shuttle, right? So it's a little bit less than the lines of code for the space shuttle. Space shuttle is a little bit more. The next clue is the React DOM package is 69,000 lines of code. And of course, this is not minimized. Minified. It's not, it hasn't had processing done on it. So this doesn't necessarily mean like this is how heavy the package is when you include it on your page or anything like that. It's just the actual human readable source code is that many lines of code. So now we know the React package is 13,000 lines of code. The React DOM package is 69,000 lines of code. And I'll tell you that overall, the source code for React includes quite a lot of packages. I'll just name a few more to help you get in the ballpark. So there's the DOM event testing library, React dev tools, and actually quite a few projects labeled experimental. And so you might not be as familiar with them, but it seems like they're kind of like smaller-ish versions of some of the standard React stuff that they're trying out, right? All right, so I'll give you a few more seconds here to make your final guess. All right. Got some music going or something, right? Okay, all right. Fully combined, all of the React packages in the source directory totaled 310,000 lines of code. And again, the React and React DOM package, that's like around 80,000 lines of code, but in total about 310. And I think when I first saw that, I was kind of like, wow, it's actually less than I was expecting. Like I thought with all the supporting code, dev tools and all the tools and stuff related to React, I actually thought it would be more. So yeah, it's 310,000 lines of code. The space shuttle was 400,000 lines of code. VS Code, at least, I don't know, from some point when I looked it up, was almost 900,000 lines of code, which is actually way less than I expected. And that Java backend I was talking about when we measured it, I guess 13 years ago or whatever now for the startup, was 4 million lines of code. Anyways, I thought that was interesting. I know lines of code isn't everything. It would be much more interesting if we could measure what me and other people might call like tokens or whatever, because that's what really matters when it comes to the conciseness of a program. It's not necessarily lines of code, because you can really spread things out, or you can really write the exact same code all on one line in a lot of cases. So it's a very rough estimate, but it's still interesting. And I don't know, maybe it helps provide perspective. Like if you're working on a project, you can, I think I used the program, I think it was called like CLOC to give me these results. You could run that on your project or whatever and see how it compares. Maybe your project has more lines of code than React. It wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of projects I've worked on definitely have more lines of code than the whole React project.